I'll never forget, like our owner, Mark Benioff, sent me a note that said, did you see this? And it just all of a sudden clicked that we could do this. And I was like, we could do this. And they said, everyone that was in the room, like, and on the call said, what do you mean? And I was like, do you understand why a cat with the body of a Pop-Tart farting a rainbow just went for $500,000? And everyone looked at me like I was crazy, and I was like, we got this. And what I saw was what Time had historically done was create analog memes with its cover on that red border for 100 years, right? And when all of a sudden I saw that that was how the space was beginning to move in, that was where I said, like, we can make that leap. What I didn't know was, like, how do you turn it into a community, right? Like, that was really important, and I spent many, many months with many of you, I'm sure, you definitely, in Clubhouse, just learning, you know, like, how do you build a community, and like, what do you think about that, and how do you use the tokens for, you know, membership and subscription and utility, and from there, Timepieces was born.
I love that. And you know, we've talked a bit about this, but I'd love to talk about the difference between audience and community. And it's such a significant difference between Web 2 and Web 3, and how that informed how you've built Timepieces as a community, like the arm of Time's brand.
Yeah, so, I mean, think about it this way, right? There's a difference between an audience and a community, right? An audience just shows up, pays attention for 1 second and leaves. A community actually wants to build, wants to be there through thick and thin. When I was at Condé Nast, in the beginning points of my career, like, I oversaw both Wired and Ars Technica at one point with Maya Drazen, who is now at Time and will be taking over Timepieces, is just an amazing individual. But wait, what I saw with Ars Technica was they really had a community, right? Ken Fisher had this forum that had millions of interactions a day. And when I asked him, like, where did he hire his journalists? He said, I don't hire journalists, I hire from within the community, right? Which is strategies that I'd always thought about, which is why when you look at the Timepiece mods, right, and Tyler and Ben Murphy and others, like, they all have come from within the Timepiece community. Now, if you think about sort of the formula for success in Web 2, right? And I've always credited this to Farouk, and he had given a really great sort of tweet back, and I think it was July of 2021, where he's like, the formula for success of a Web 2 brand is brand, hires a creator who reaches an audience, right? So, like, here's a real world example. So Time hires Ian Bremmer, who writes about something happening in Ukraine. You Google Ukraine, you see in the search results that Ian Bremmer wrote it, it's by Time, you trust Time, you like Ian Bremmer, you click to read it, I serve you an ad, and then you leave, and you go on with your day, and you don't think about it, right? That's an audience. In Web 3, the formula for success is community forms around an artist, right? Take Victor Mascara. I didn't think we would talk so much about Victor, right?
We love Victor, by the way. We absolutely love the
Shout out to Victor.
Yeah.
Right? Well, Victor doesn't represent all of Colombia. I love that. No, but like, a community forms around an artist or a creator and uplifts that creator and sends a signal. And then a brand's job, and this is the formula that we were thinking about with Timepieces, was a brand's job is to uplift that creator further by using its platform. What's different in this is that instead of the brand being the hero, the brand is the validator, right? And by uplifting it further and validating on their platforms, the community then comes along to the brand. Now, there's two ways then that the brand could then sort of affix itself in a community-based sort of model like that. And we've talked about this on the podcast. You can either be a greed-based community, where you're only thinking about the monetary return or lack of return, or you could be a values-based community. And in bull markets, greed-based communities emerge, you know, in mass. And in bull markets and bear markets, values-based communities tend to be the ones that survive, right? And those are the ones that are rallying around something bigger than just a monetary value.
Yeah, I love these topics that you're touching on, especially about the monetary value and using media as a platform to elevate versus versus media as a platform to distribute. I'd love to touch base on this because I think it's a very important conversation that we need to have around transitioning from the programmatic model of Web 2, which is all about clicks and eyeballs, even to the extent that I'm of the opinion that it's like a house of cards to an extent. You know, and I've been very public about that. Programmatic does not belong in Web 3, right? Because it's really fundamental. What from the perspective of time, and you being a media pioneer, you did Wired, you did Bloomberg, you innovated so many different platforms and so many different products. What is not coming to Web 3 from Web 2?
Sure. So, look, like when you think about Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, right? Like if you say Web 1, read, write internet, Web 2, read, write social internet, Web 3, read, write social ownership internet, right? That's one definition. I'm playing with a different idea. Web 1 is brands are a monolithic internet. Web 2, brands are an interactive one, right? Like in Web 1, Time publishes and all of a sudden, you know, you just read. In Web 2, Time publishes, something goes wrong or you don't like it. At Time, I have a complaint. At Time, I like this, and then Time can respond. And then in Web 3, it becomes more of a humanized brand, right? Like personalities emerge, individuals emerge in community-based sort of NFT platforms. So the other way to think about it also, though, is through the lens of privacy, right? Web 1 is nobody owns anything privacy web. Web 2 is a they own you privacy web, right? They meaning Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you know, like any of those type of platforms, LinkedIn, right? Web 3 is a you own you sort of internet, right? As it relates to privacy. Now, it doesn't mean you're private. It means you own your personal information. Why is that important? Well, if you look at the media landscape today, I would argue that the media landscape is going to struggle with a huge rise in consumer privacy protection laws. You have in Europe GDPR, you have in the US CCPA, you have Google, you know, which is going to make good on their promise of sunsetting third-party cookies, right? So what does that mean? That means, like, think about media companies. They primarily have two ways of making money. Episodic revenue, which is advertisers, which is short-term, large dollar amounts, and annuities, which is subscriptions, right? And that's small dollar amounts, but you would play a volume game. To give you like a real-life example of how powerful Web3 could be, when you look at the average sort of value of a digital subscription to Time, it's $40, right? But when you look at the average value of a timepiece, it's $800. Now, in Web3, when you own a timepiece, it actually unlocks access to everything the digital subscription would offer, and then the goal is you start to build more and more moats around why people should hold on to the timepiece or own multiple timepieces.
For our audience who doesn't understand these terms, can you elaborate what a moat is within our community?
Just when I say a moat, I mean more protections, right? Like more reasons for why your brand should stay top of mind to an individual. Why you shouldn't just click on an article and then leave. Like why you would come back and you would start to talk about the brand more often. Why, like if I say Time, like people are even excited. Like as you said, you know, like Time was a brand when I came in 3.5 years ago that was completely neglected prior to the ownership of Martin and Benioff, right? And then they enabled us to really invest in thinking it through. Now our game plan was never, like for real, our game plan was never to enter into Web3 from the beginning, right? It wasn't. Like I came in, I had a game plan of like restructuring, but then as we kept—
What was that conversation with Benioff actually? Like if I was a fly in the wall,
right.
I'd love to, you walked into Mark's office and you're like, Mark, I need Web3.
No,
now.
it's not gonna happen. No, actually, so I don't know how much I've ever told the story, but this is the most amazing Web3 story. Oh, I love that, like,
I'm excited.
We're here for some alpha, guys. This is some
I'm
alpha
like
here.
moving around and shifting. Okay, so the Nyan Cat was actually the whole discussion on us entering into Web3. Trust me, let me run with this. And he was amazing. And they just literally let me run with it. And Mark said, let me put you in touch with some friends. And he put me in touch with Guy Osieri. And Guy did this like Web3 speed dating night for us. And we met all of these people in Web3, and of the night, we met 2 people that were the only 2 people that would ultimately take my call. Nobody would take my call, okay? Like, I called everyone, every platform, nobody would take us serious that what time was gonna enter into Web3. The only 2 people that would take me seriously were Jimmy McNeilis and John Crane at Super Rare, okay?
And Alejandro and I met at NFT now.
No, we didn't know each other.
No, we didn't, but we took you seriously though.
But we didn't know each other yet, right? Because I will tell you, like, so only John Crane and Jimmy McNeilis. And Jimmy was building stuff that just wasn't gonna be ready. And so John said, if you want to come into Web3, you can do it on Super Rare to me. Like, and it was amazing. And I had never minted anything. And John actually lent me Ethereum, and then he walked me through how to mint. And the first time I ever minted something, I thought that I could hold it private until it went public. Like my mind wasn't there yet. So I thought it was private. So I minted like the 3 covers, like is God dead, is truth dead, is fiat dead. And the next thing I saw, then I like got up because I'm like a 90-year-old. I went into the kitchen to get seltzer. I opened up a seltzer and I get a bid for the Is God Dead for $15,000. And this was like 5 minutes after. And I called John Crane up and I go, this is verbatim, what the fuck is wrong with you? like, I thought this was private, blah, blah, blah. He's like, no, I didn't tell you. It's on the blockchain. It's all hilarious. Yeah. So anyway, I go, what do I do? This is a big bid, right? $15,000. And he goes, trust me. He's like, just cancel, just deny it, and like start the auction, and we'll go through the plan that we had set forth. But don't worry, like people will bid on it. Like it's worth more than 15K from what I'm seeing. So I said, okay. So I cancel it. Saturday comes, no bids. Sunday comes, no bids. Monday comes, no bids, right? Like, and so I'm like, oh my God. So then finally, like, we're going into it, and everyone is like mocking us and like mocking me in particular. And somebody on the team says, oh, if you get more than like 15K for this night, like, we'll give you, like, we'll buy you lunch. Which, by the way, they've never bought me lunch. And that night we did $440,000, right? And Amir and others like sort of helped us through. So I started to understand how the one-of-one market worked, which the one-of-one market's a lot like episodic advertising in media, where it's like there are individuals who sell. Then one day I wake up a few months later, and I'm doing all of my studying for how we're going to evolve into timepieces, and I get this note from John Knopf, and John Knopf, who is on Twitter Spaces, is usually like my planky, right? And he says, did you see that Super Rare converted to a DAO and issued rare tokens? And I said, no, I missed that email. So I can't believe I've never told you the story. So this is amazing. So I look in my inbox, and like in the filed away, like what looked like junk, was this email from Super Rare saying, click here to claim your rare token. And I claimed it, and my jaw hit the ground. We had done so much business that Time had accumulated $1.4 million worth of rare tokens.
Wow, that's not a small feat.
So I converted it to Ethereum immediately, because we're not allowed, like, we can hold Bitcoin, we can hold Ethereum. Like, we're really, like, at that time we weren't really looking at other currencies or other tokens. And I converted to Ethereum, and then I converted $1 million of cash, and I sent $1 million of cash to Time, and I said, take this and enjoy. And I held on to 400,000, and the 400,000 that I got from the Super Rare conversion actually paid for the launch of timepieces. And so I never had a conversation or a business plan or a single meeting with anyone. I literally funded all of timepieces from a DAO conversion in Super Rare.
It's brilliant.
So
Give it up for that. That's wow.
That's really truly the power of Web3 right now.
100%. That is the power of Web3, and it's like I'm happy because I haven't really told that story, but like on like one of my last appearances, like for you to hear, like like, think about like the participatory sort of aspect in Super Rare enabled me to ultimately do this.
To fundamentally shift the, like, it's not just do this, and this. You fundamentally shifted the media landscape conversation because of the legacy brand, right? Like, that's when afterwards, I remember you came on, you did that, had the revenue, Billboard came in, right? Then Vogue came in with Vogue Business very hard, right? So you're literally shifting tides. It's not just like, oh, I did this, and this. He's being very humble, right? Like when we're talking about enterprise media entering the space because of your leadership.
Absolutely. And one thing I think that's really inspiring too is as we think about the future of tokenized media, seeing how you have really led that charge, and from minting those early covers to launching timepieces in partnership with artists, to doing a number of different dynamics with the Slice of Times and the like. I would love to hear from you too as we think about how Web3 will change the face of media. What excites you most about the future of tokenized media?
Sure, so I think that people sometimes confuse the technology and its potential from great journalism, right? Or let's not call it journalism for a second, we'll just call it great IP, right? Intellectual property. Here's a thought experiment that any of you can sort of play with. Take the Iliad, possibly one of the most famous stories ever, right? The Iliad was originally memorized. Then the written press came around, the printing press came around, and the Iliad was printed, right? Then all of a sudden digital media came around, and you can read the Iliad on your iPhone, or you can read your Iliad on a Kindle, or you can read your Iliad on a computer screen. If you have an Alexa, you could say, Alexa, read me the Iliad, right? In every instance, it's still the same IP that's lasted thousands of years. And that's because it's amazing IP, right? And in every instance, the consumer engagement with that sort of IP is completely different than what it was for a different generation. For me, I start to think about that quite a bit as it relates to the written word, because, maybe it's not that it's, that the written word is tokenized as much as maybe tokens provide access to the written word, right? We don't know yet. It's still very early, right? When the internet started to come out, you saw the likes of Google and Facebook and others laying foundations. And then after those large foundational sort of groups came into place, then you all of a sudden saw Ubers and Airbnbs and other types of organizations. And so what I'm not worried about, and this is why I always send the two of you notes about the articles I love that you're doing and the quality of NFT now, and that is 100% promotional because I love their product and I'm a huge fan, is as long as you're creating great content, as you start to see this ecosystem mature in different areas, we'll all figure out exactly how to use the technology to access the content completely differently. But my perception on the space today is so different than what it was 3 months ago versus 6 months ago, and it's changing so much that it's impossible to say here you go. What I can feel fairly confident about is that there will always be a world for art and collectibles in the space, and I genuinely feel that art and collectibles will be almost like the glue of the space, right? Of the evolution. But that there's also this other aspect of NFTs as a technology that will have zero value, that will just enable memberships and subscriptions and loyalty and rewards. And I think that you, as NFT Now and Time and other media brands, will look at those aspects of Web3's evolution in terms of making better business decisions for the evolution of their organization.
I think that evolution is a really key element that I want to bring into this. Right now, we have 5 more minutes, by the way, so I want to really speak to what's going on in the current state of media, right? And I think something that Web3 really enables us to do is transparency. And there's been so much conversations around truth in media, right? Who is telling the truth? What truth is being told, right? And how much of it is it being propped up because of financial gains? How much is it being propped up because of incentives or conflicts of interest and things of that nature? Matt, do you want to go into that question about FTX and media that's going in right now?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. Like, we're looking at the conversation on Twitter, and obviously all of the terrible news about the collapse of FTX and the like. It feels like, at least the Web3 community largely feels like the mainstream media missed the mark in their coverage. Whether it was a soft piece from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal and the like. And what's been interesting is watching the rise of sort of citizen journalism, people who understand this technology and are actually tracking these assets in real time on Etherscan and the like. I'm just curious, like, what's your thought on the future of media and citizen journalism and where the mainstream will sit in it?
Sure. So, like, first, my entire career until December 31st has been with journalists, right? And I have the utmost regard for what I would say is the fourth estate, whether it's in the United States or globally. And I don't think, I'm perplexed too why it's been so sort of soft. And I don't believe the conspiracy theories, right? Because there's no scenario where like journalists all talk in a room behind the scenes and are like, let's be nice to this. Like, that's just not how it works. And there's no scenario where just because he was a big donor to politicians means that politicians will go lightly on him, because like he actually will have nothing to give them future facing, right? And he's actually embarrassed them more than he's helped them at this point. And so,
But then why do you think the media, from that perspective, why the media is not really aggressive?
Space doesn't understand this space well enough to understand what really happened. And I think that the effective altruism approach that he took is so welcomed and warming that it's hard to believe that somebody who used money for so much good could also do something that was so bad, right? I think that people, and then in an industry where people don't really understand it, like, and I'll give you a real example, was, I got a lot of amazing, and it's been humbling notes when my announcement came out on Monday, and then I had one journalist from a very prominent source call me up and say, I've known you for nearly 20 years, and I have to tell you, I'm really concerned about you. And I said, what are you concerned about? I'm like, I really appreciate that, but what are you concerned about? And they said, you're going into crypto when FTX is imploding and destroying the industry. And I said, well, look, I was like, FTX and this individual is not a crypto issue, it's a bad actor issue. And I said, if you look at any industry, telco, you have MCI, energy, you have Enron. Health, you had Theranos. In the financial industry, you have Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Bernie Madoff, right? I could go through every industry, we only have a few minutes left, right? But I literally could go through every industry and I could show you bad actors. The reality is that, like, in my case, and I said to this journalist, I was like, MoonPay does something completely different than what FTX does and has zero exposure to FTX, right? The only exposure it has is the generalized belief that this is one ecosystem. And so I think that at the highest end, the problem is really a communication problem where, since the technology is so complex, like, it's not really understood as to how to report or what this individual can be doing. On the citizen journalism front, I think that it's important that we separate citizen journalism from what I've been calling mob journalism, right? Citizen journalism is, individuals using Etherscan and providing objective perspective on what happened, right? Like, this was that. You could see one of the most beautiful aspects of this ecosystem is its transparency. Mob journalism is, how many people can I get into a room, how much engagement can I get, and how sensationalized can I make it? Mob journalism is dangerous, okay? Like, it is. Like, it might be fun, it might be entertaining, but it's not journalism, right? It's engagement farming. Citizen journalism is unbelievably powerful, right? Like, and you see it not just in our space, like in Iran, like you're seeing it on the streets as people hold up and show the protests and other places. And like, I've loved the rise of citizen journalism. I just worry about the frustration that's taking place between the disjointed coverage of mainstream journalism and the citizen journalism that's taking place is really, in this instance, elevated mob journalism, to a point where it's also very exhausting emotionally. And I would think like all of us would just like to see it sort of like enough already, right? Like just like.
All right, last couple seconds. Where is media in 5 years?
I mean, media will, can I give a little second analogy? Okay. Media is like horses, okay? Who would have ever thought I would have ended on a horses analogy? Media is like horses. I used to say this about print, right? And this is, and I apologize for the American sort of centric analogy. I was a government major with a focus on American history, politics, and theory when I was in college, so I sometimes give these perspectives. When America was settled, right, and was beginning to be expanded upon, and you look at the Oregon Trail, horses were mass transportation, right? Like, how did people get across country? Horses, right? And then trains came along, and horses became localized sort of transportation, right? But then cars came along, and horses didn't die or go into extinction. They just got relegated to two new areas, right? To the affluent, right? And then to the gamblers, right? What you're seeing with media in the landscape today, unfortunately with paywalls in some instances, is that really great media is only available to the affluent, right? And so it's given a rise to some, lesser sort of media that has emerged over here. I think that over the coming years, depending on legislation, it will be very interesting to see where media goes. I think that if there was ever an instance where Section 230 of the FCC's guidelines, which is a rule that states that Twitter and Facebook and the likes, are not responsible for the content that they transmit. If they ever were held responsible for that, I think you would see an incredible rise in the quality of information and media that's in the landscape. If nothing happens, I think in 5 years, we'll just have really new, interesting ways of interacting with content that will emerge, and probably in 5 years, none of us will use the term NFT, or we'll talk about blockchains, or we'll talk about sort of the technology, but we'll look at what the experiences are that those unleash.
Well, on that note, we are at time. Everyone give it up for Keith Grossman.